Hi, everybody. This is Livia Davis. We are just waiting a couple more minutes and let folks have a chance to come into the room. This is the Bringing Racial Equity Strategies to Recovery Support Services webinar. And while you're joining us, coming into the room, you can see in the chat box that people are starting to share their names and where they're calling in from. We invite you to do the same. We've got Colorado, New York, Illinois, Maine, Georgia so far, Arizona, Georgia, California, yay, Michigan, Ohio, Massachusetts, Washington. Hello from Minnesota and Virginia. Yes, nice to have such nice representation. Metro Detroit is in the house, says Julie. New York, yay. All right, well, why don't we get started? Welcome to today's webinar. Again, my name is Livia Davis, and you are in the webinar on the topic of bringing racial equity strategies to recovery support services. Your hosts are Ashley Stewart and myself. Ashley, could I ask you just to introduce yourself quickly, and I'll do the same after you.
Sure thing. Hello, 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 everyone. I hope that you are having an amazing day. We are so happy to be here with you and so excited to be talking about an important topic, to get a discussion started and to engage with you all. My name is Ashley Stewart, and I am an adjunct expert at C4. Focusing on racial equity and specifically racial equity and recovery in this space, as well as I am a full-time professor. I'm really just excited to be here.
Thank you, Ashley. I am the Chief Learning Officer at C4 Innovations, and before coming in as a trainer and training consultant at C4, I did about 15 years of direct services, working with people experiencing homelessness and really coming up with solutions with them to overcome solutions. Originally, I am from Denmark, and I grew up in a recovery community organization there that has really influenced a lot of my life. And we're just so pleased to have you here joining us.
Amazing. So as we get started, I just want to share one thing. I know this is a webinar, and sometimes folks just sit back and watch webinars. No, not here. We're going to be active. I want you to know that you can use the chat as much as you like, ask questions, affirm things, get into the conversation. We want to see you engage. We want to see you participate in the chat, and know that it won't be distracting. Know that it is a welcome part of the culture of how we do webinars here. So I just want to invite folks to be active in our chat today and participating with us, because we're excited to see you, and we're so glad that you're in this space.
All right, we should probably move to, there we go. So C4 Innovations, you have been to our website. I'm sure you have been seeing some emails from us, but just a few words about C4 to get us started. C4 is a woman-owned small business. We operate across the United States. And what we really want to do and just highlight is we facilitate transformation by supporting clients and partners in the design and implementation of solutions to improve outcomes for communities that are marginalized by structural racism and discriminatory policies and practices across systems. As you can see on this slide, we are committed to reducing disparities and achieving equitable outcomes. We're wanting to develop and implement research-based solutions that are person-centered, recovery-oriented, and trauma-informed. And that means working with people with lived experience as key partners on all our projects in the work that we do. If you want to learn more about us, you can visit us at c4innovates.com. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/C4Innovates. We have a Twitter handle, as you can see, C4Innovates. We also have a LinkedIn profile and a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel has lots of really good resources if you're interested in finding out more about us. Thank you. Lee, I'm going to turn this to you. Okay.
Yeah. So for technical support today, audio is available through your computer speakers or by calling in via phone. To change the source or troubleshoot an issue, feel free to click that little up caret next to your audio settings, and you can test and work out what might be the issue. And if you have any questions that you cannot see there, you can feel free to send me a message in the chat. We encourage you, like Ashley said, to really use the chat, share your thoughts and comments and ideas, post your questions that you might have. We really, really encourage you to share, as we get just as much out of this. Learning from you, that is totally what we're all about. So the other option that I am turning on right now is that you also have the availability for a full transcript. So if you would like that to be on, you can use either subtitles, which will show up underneath the presentation, or view the full transcript and it will open to the right of your meeting window, and you can see that. If you don't want it at all, you can hide it. No worries. And again, let us know if you have any technical questions. We're so excited you're here. We are recording this event, and the event will be available for viewing on the C4 YouTube channel. Usually it takes about a week just to get it up there and get it ready for everyone to view it. And then also, if you would like any training or technical assistance on addressing equity and recovery support services, please go ahead and email training@c4innovates.com. We love to hear from folks, and we are happy to work out something with you, and we are always looking to assist in training and technical assistance.
All right, folks, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started today with our discussion. So we are going to be talking about how to develop skills to have open and honest conversations and discussions about racial equity. Why is that important? Why do we need to do that? And more specifically, why do we need support in being able to do this? In this session, I mean, we're going to briefly talk about it, but we really do have some critical conversations about the history of race and racism in the US, and specifically how that ties to racism that is underpinned in recovery spaces. We're going to touch on it briefly today, but of course, this is an ongoing conversation and one that we are diving into more deeply. We want to talk about strategies for beginning to apply anti-racist practices. I remind folks that anti-racism is in the title, it's an action. And so we're going to talk about what that actionable anti-racist practices looks like. And then this will give you an opportunity to ask any questions or get some insight into our upcoming course, which is Racial Equity and Recovery 101, Addressing Race-Related Barriers in Recovery Support Services. Right? So I want to start off with a little bit about the why. I'm going to read a few quotes that are from different scholars or authors that we often refer to in our work. And I just want to see, I want you to as I'm reading these quotes, I'm going to give a little bit of brief background and history and context to why these quotes were chosen and the work and how that ties into the work that we do within our training sessions. But I also want you to see which one of them resonates the most with you. So the first one is by Dr. Ken Hardy. Dr. Ken Hardy states that social justice has more to do with critiques around power and inequitable distribution of that power, right? A social justice perspective, yes, it appreciates differences, but it also attempts to look at the ways in which we are situated differently. The way that everyone can possess power, but not everyone possesses it equally. And by not possessing it equally, not being able to utilize it, right? So when we're talking about racism and racial equity, we're talking about systems and structures of power. We talk about interpersonal and individual forms of oppression as mainly racism. We talk about the community and social aspects of racism. And we also look at the structural systemic overview of how racism is perpetuated and pervasive. And so all of this context is rooted in power and the role that power has in oppressive systems. A lot of times we might shy away from it because it seems so vast or so big. But when we really get down to having a critical conversation about what is racism and how does power play a role in racism, we really see how capable we are of each individual's beginning to address systems of racism and perpetuations of racism. The second quote that I have here is by Ben Hedge, and it says that each of us is learning to ask, and by each of us, I mean every single person in this webinar, every person in your organization, every person in your community, each of us should be learning to ask, what is the informal and formal power that I hold for culture shift? How do I yield that power to change damaging norms and power dynamics within an institution? How do you wield that power? And the reason why this question is so critically relevant is because I think a lot of times we don't think that we have much formal and informal power, but we do. And part of the work that we do with these webinars and with these trainings is beginning to deconstruct and see the ways that we do have informal and formal power. And to also acknowledge that changing racism and addressing racism, being anti-racist, is about shifting culture. We do not embrace this idea of like performative diversification. No, we want the culture to shift. We want our actions to be sustainable. And a lot of the sessions, I'm sure Livia can speak to this too. People ask us all the time, why now? Why are we having this conversation now? People have been fighting for these issues. Yes, that's why these initiatives that we are pursuing right now cannot just continue to perpetuate the cycle, but needs to lead to culture shift, because we don't want to have these conversations anymore. We want to begin to have conversations that build on it and continue to push us into deeper levels of inclusion. And that is the goal. Yes. Someone puts in the chat, just so you know, if you post in the chat and you post a panelist and not panelists and attendees, I'll happily include your comment. I just won't associate your name. If you post to panelists and attendees, then I assume you're comfortable with folks knowing who you are. So if you want to contribute but don't want everyone to know, you can send it to panelists. Or if you want to share it with everyone, just make sure panelists and attendees are clicked. So someone says those in control have problems with sharing it, and they're talking about power with others whom they want to continue to marginalize. You are right on track with our quotes. And so thank you for bringing that in. Yeah. Some folks are already beginning to write into the chat. They want to learn how to talk about power and how to use power for change. Awesome. This next quote comes from Kimberly Crenshaw, and it talks about self-interrogation is a good place to start. People say, well, where do I start? What's the book group? What's the 5-step plan? What is the 9-step trajectory for us to be an anti-racist organization? Well, self-interrogation is a great place to start. And that's where a lot of our processes do start. If you see inequality as a them problem or unfortunate other problem or something else that we can displace onto other people, then that is actually the root of the problem. Being able to attend to not just unfair exclusion, but frankly, unlearning our unearned inclusion or sense of entitlement to unearned inclusion is a critical part of pursuing. Kimberly talks about, Dr. Crenshaw talks about equality. I would say equity as well, right? And in the upcoming trainings, we do go through what is the differences between equality and equity, because there's a big difference. And then another quote that situates NRY is to respond to the oppressive inequities. This is an adaptation that I made to this quote, but to respond to oppressive inequities should neither be embarrassing, inconvenient, nor confusing. Those responses are luxuries for people with time to spare, excuse the typo, who feel no particular sense of urgency about the need to solve certain serious problems. And this quote is easily one of my favorite quotes. More specifically, it's talking about the plight of Black folk and Black Americans and African Americans. And it talks about oppressive inequities, systemic and structural inequities, and how our ability to take slow and incremental change, to say we'll start with a group, is a privilege. And it's a demonstration of our ability to potentially have a lack of urgency to solve certain social problems. But we're talking about racism and recovery spaces. There is urgency, and there is an immediate need to respond. Someone asked if the slides will be shared. The video recording will be posted, and all of the slides will be included in the video. So I want to hear from y'all. Which one of these quotes kind of stands out to you the most? You can just type in the first name or one of the names of the authors. I want to hear from you. Which of these quotes really resonates with you? And it's like, yeah, this is what I want to lean into more. The first one, yeah. The first one, that is the Hardy. Crenshaw, Hardy, Torrey and Hamilton. Yep. Nice. Crenshaw. A lot of folks resonate with the work of Kimberly Crenshaw. Yeah. Okay. It's good to know, right? Yeah. The last one about urgency. Yep. So these are all scholars and folks. Okay, yep, someone else said Ben Hedge. These are all folks who we bring in their scholarship, their work, their experiences, because Ben Hedgemore talks about his experiences into the conversations that we have. There's two other quotes that I want to speak to. And these two quotes, I think, are really powerful. Please continue to type in your favorite. I'm going to collect them and use them in our upcoming training sessions too, so that we can have an idea as to which ones folks are interested in leaning into more. These two quotes really focus on decolonization. And decolonization, as might some of the terms from the previous quote, might be new to you. And that's okay. If there's any terms that we're using today and you're like, I'm not quite sure what that means, no worries. Because those are the types of questions we love to answer. Equity and versus equality, I don't know the difference. That's okay. We love to answer that question. Systemic and structural racism, I don't know what you mean by that. That's okay. We love to answer that question, right? And so these particular quotes, I think, really focus on looking at decolonization, which is a really important work, a really important body of scholarship and action related to equity. So we're about to run headlong into a member of simultaneous crisis. Thus, we must discuss strategies for decolonization. We cannot afford to ignore our current predicament. While addressing colonialism in our lives, it is important for us to understand how that struggle influences, how it interacts with, and is affected by other global emergencies. It is an awareness of these impending crises that must foreground all of our vision, thoughts, and actions, and that those things need to be related to decolonization. right? And so this is Waziatowin and Michael Yellowbird from one of their texts. Right? What's so critically important about this, I think it stands out to me, is that last line. And actions need to be related to decolonization. When we're talking about culture shift, what really underscores culture shift is the fact that these actions of oppression and colonialism are rooted in our systems. It's what feels normal to many of us. So when we talk about decolonization, it is about understanding and having a critical knowledge of the information that we have been able to ignore, to minimize, to not face head on, right? Understanding the larger systemic and structural impact of social issues. Yes. Yeah, right, yeah. I see some folks saying that they appreciate these quotes and the people who wrote about them, right? If you haven't heard of some of these scholars, no worries. This is our activists. Please know that we can provide more information on that. And also, they also have amazing work that you can follow up on as well. The engagement in trial provides individuals and the community with a sense of control over the conditions of their lives. When this process is disrupted, it further the feelings of hopelessness and despair that makes the loss of control feel more complete. I'm sorry, that's supposed to say the engagement in ritual. I'm not sure, autocorrect must have tried to change that, but the engagement in ritual, right, provides individuals and communities with a sense of control over the conditions of their lives. When this process is disrupted, it furthers feelings of hopelessness and despair and makes the loss of control feel more complete. And so if we think about it, that is why someone who's a colonizer, colonizing groups would purposely disrupt ritual practices of those who they sought to conquer. Yes, no, thank you for your grace on the typo. I see some folks saying, I do that all the time. Right. And so this is by Sherry Mitchell. Right. So these quotes, which ones stand out to you, or which ones would you be interested in learning more? Nahamu or Waziatowin and Michael Yellowbird? Either of these stand out? The second one? Yes, Miss Mitchell. Right. If we think about, some of the critical conversations we like to engage in as well is talking about historical trauma, racial trauma, and insidious trauma. This quote about rituals speaks so heavily to the long-lasting implications of historical, insidious, and identity-based trauma. Disrupting rituals and how that message is translated generation to generation, the intended disruption of those messaging, right? And so this is a very, very powerful, very powerful work. And so I encourage folks to follow up. Right, yeah. Lois says to everyone, I believe that when you take away the culture of people, they only have what's provided to them and not their own. And a lot of times that's forceful. So I ask folks, what is the culture in recovery spaces? Yes, we suggest that it's also very visible in gender constructs. Absolutely. So think about the cultures that you're part of, right? What are the cultures that we buy into? Yes, so someone asked, can we elaborate on the disruption of rituals, specifically the disruption of rituals in recovery spaces? We have a slide that looks at equity and recovery spaces, and I'm going to be sure to respond to that when we get to that slide. Thank you. That's an excellent question. So one of the ways that we begin to say, how do we engage with this conversation? Well, we have a lot of strategies. In fact, we have whole training sessions on strategies about how to engage in these conversations. We have rules of the road that guide us. We have talking points or de-escalation, conflict resolution, conflict engagement, because we like to embrace conflict in this work. We have a lot of strategies that begin to address that. But for some of the internal work, I like to also bring in the zones of learning. We have our comfort zone. This is familiar, it's easy, right? And it may not be all that challenging. It might not even motivate us to change, but we're here, we're present, we're engaged. And then there's that stretch zone. That's marked by that engagement. That's that lean in, that I'm learning. I might even be feeling nervous excitement, right? And most people say that that's the place that we want to be, that stretch zone. That's where you're getting the most information. But then there's also the panic zone. And that's where folks tend to feel overwhelmed or uncomfortable. This might be where people start to avoid or deflect. This might be the point at which someone goes, okay, well, we're not going to talk about that here. And when it comes to equity work, I want us to take a really critical look at the panic zone. Are we using this panic zone as a mode of deflection? Is the panic zone what is holding you back from doing equity-related work, of thinking critically about racial equity in recovery spaces? Perhaps it is the panic zone that is the space that we need to not run away from, but embrace to say, I need to do some deeper assessment as to why this particular conversation makes me feel so uncomfortable. Because that work is going to allow you to identify the places where you need to lean in more and get more information, have more critical conversations. Of course, there's times when we go into the panic zone because something is triggering or to us, or maybe it brings up a memory or a thought. And that's also an important space to acknowledge, to give ourselves grace, to make sure that we're spending the time healing where we need to heal to be able to do this work. And a lot of times, this place can also be a place marked with some privilege, our ability to deflect or move on, which really reminds me of the Touré and Hamilton quote about it being a luxury to be uncomfortable for a moment in time or for a conversation. And instead, we want to acknowledge the discomfort that the people who we are intending to serve may live with every single day, right? I don't know, what do y'all think? Let me know in the chat. Do y'all think, have you felt yourself go into panic zones? Another place where I see panic zone really come in is if we're talking about something that's structural and systemic and you have an interpersonal relationship with it. So you're like, that's not my truth. That's not what I've seen. I'm going to shut down because this feels really personal. Are you getting a larger systemic conversation that's happening that may involve some other truths that are outside of your own personal lived experience? I find that that's a place that sends most people into a mode of being distracted or deflecting. Yeah. All right. Let me know in chat if y'all still with us here. Yeah, some folks are saying fear of the panic zone, right? People fear the panic zone. Well, one of our rules of the road, we talked about rules of the road earlier. One of the rules that we like to start off all of our conversations with is that in order to change things, we must first be able to acknowledge it. We cannot challenge what we are unwilling to acknowledge. Yes, some folks are telling me they're in a stretch zone now. I love it. Mm-hmm. Some folks are saying panic zone is where accountability happens. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yes, someone shares that they get triggered when intersectional identities are not recognized, especially specifically issues with Black trans women. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You'll see in some of our slides, we go into intersectionality and we go into the real definition of intersectionality, because one of the things we like to talk critically about is how terms have been misused, and how we have come to make those terms comfortable for ourselves and not really get to the anti-essentialism that is underscoring intersectionality. Thank you to the person who put that in there. Who is more inclined to matriculate into the panic zone, the oppressed or the oppressor? That's a fantastic question. In my experiences, I find that the oppressor or folks who perpetuate oppression tend to go into the panic zone and deflect more. And so that has been my experience. Most of the time when folks who experience depression go into the panic zone, they are typically feeling pressure to be more vulnerable in the space. The panic zone for people who are experiencing oppression is also the unnecessary and overextended pressure to speak for groups or to tell your story for people to believe you, and that's what sends folks into the panic zone. And so I think in that it has its own value of talking through and processing. Whereas for people who are perpetuating or benefiting from oppression tend to utilize that panic zone as a way to deflect or to, not have to deal with the emotional labor of recognizing people's oppression. Really great question. Someone asked a great question. Can you be safe in the panic zone? Absolutely. Absolutely. And the person also acknowledges that they begin to I want to go back to that. They don't learn well in the panic zone. Well, usually what happens in the panic zone is we immediately try to get out of it. That we're just like, let me go look at, we immediately try to get out of it. We immediately try to turn off that cognition. And I want to talk about both safe spaces and brave spaces. Because what feels safe to me might not feel safe to someone else, and what feels brave to me might not feel brave to someone else. And yes, it is exactly that, your fight or flight zone. And so if you were in your fight or flight zone, and your parasympathetic system is activated, you want to stop and you want to take deep breaths. Literally just breathe and ask yourselves, why am I in a panic zone? Why do I want to run away from this conversation? And when people are in that panic zone and feeling like they can't learn, I tell people to take out a pen and paper or take out a note and say, I am in panic zone because of this, and then allow themselves to do a time and grace to get to a point where you address it or acknowledge it, because that's most likely the place where you need to lean in the most. So it's about taking some deep breaths, assessing, saying, I'm safe, I'm fine. This is just a conversation that's uncomfortable for me. Why is this conversation uncomfortable for me? What do I not know about this topic that's making me so uncomfortable? How can I lean in more and get more information about this topic so that it doesn't intimidate me or cause fear for me? What I'm feeling based on my lived experience is valid, but there's also a message here that I want to be sure to hear. Yeah. Yeah, someone says we have to become accustomed to the panic zone being a teachable moment. Someone says you can be safe in your panic zone if you are the oppressor. I believe the oppressed is not safe when someone goes into panic zone. Great, yeah. Stepping into the discomfort, someone says, it is teaching you something, to pay attention to it. With individuals with systemic and unearned privilege, the big difference between discomfort of the privilege owning their unearned privileges and the real experience, violence and danger, emotional, psychological, spiritual, and physical, that systemically oppressed individuals and groups face because of structural oppression. We try to make that distinction for folk. Yeah, right. So is your discomfort or rooted around something emotional, physical, spiritual, psychological, systemic oppression that you have, or is it with, feeling like some aspect of your privilege or identity is being called into question? Is it about guilt or shame? If so, let's address that head on, because guilt and shame doesn't serve us well in this work. Livia, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I think we covered most of it. I think that if you have an opportunity, which you will with us in the course, to look at what are my privileges, where am I subjugated, where am I privileged, right? And then looking at that as you think about where is your stretch zone, that is what we support you to do through some community agreements, through some exercises, and understanding, that we don't want anyone in the panic zone is something we also pay attention to.
Yeah. When you see people in the panic zone, do you immediately pull them in, right? Someone says something harmful and people say, that's harmful. Do you feel the need to immediately coddle someone and say, oh, that's okay, I know you didn't mean it like that? Or is there some aspect of accountability that you're prepared to engage with to say, look, I know you're a great person, but what you said was harmful. So let's talk about how you can do better next time or make sure that doesn't happen again, right? But a lot of times we don't want to be in the panic zone. We don't want other people to be in the panic zone. And that has led to a lot of silencing. And I think that that's worth talking about as well. Who can we talk to about the zone? Someone asked. Well, this is just kind of like an introductory, but we definitely go into the zones very thoroughly in the future trainings, but you're always welcome to reach out if you have more specific questions about the zones, and always happy to talk about it. But I think also having accountability partners is important too. So if you're going in and saying, I'm committing to racial equity work, who can you tag on to say, hey, hold me accountable? If you see me start saying, I can't believe it, I was rebuffed, or, someone said that what I said was a problem, get people around you who will say, okay, well, let's assess why what you said was problematic, instead of going, oh, it's okay, you didn't mean it like that, right? Who's around you and who's supporting you in this accountability? And so I think that's a really great question about who to talk to about your zones. Someone who's going to be your accountability partner and who's going to help you grow, as opposed to help you feel better about any mistakes you make along the way. We need to learn to give ourselves grace and not expect that from other folks. Does this make you fragile to need support with racial equity work? No, it doesn't make you fragile. Not at all. One of the things that I noticed is that a lot of times we look for other people to give us grace. I made a mistake. I said something that was harmful. And now I'm looking for everyone else to make me feel better about what I said. And the reality of it is that sometimes we need to give ourselves the grace and not expect it so much from other people. I studied microaggressions for 10 years and I microaggressed against someone. I didn't feel the need or I did feel the need to defend myself and say, oh, I'm so sorry. I know all about microaggressions. This should never happen for me. All I could do was be better and make sure that I never caused that harm again. I don't need that. I shouldn't expect that grace from other folks because I perpetuated harm. And so sometimes you need to just, get that grace from yourself and have people around you who will say that was harmful, right? And acknowledging that that is support, that is support. People calling you in is support. Yeah. Great points, everyone. Wow. I really appreciate everyone being so engaged. I encourage you to send what you're saying to panelists and attendees, because y'all are saying some amazing stuff in this panelist chat. Livia, were you going to say something?
Just to mention specifically, this notion of white fragility, right? And with something we would cover as well in the course, it's important for my white colleagues not to feel that the conversation necessarily needs to be comfortable for you all the time, because or should happen in a way that makes it okay for you, that makes you feel good about yourself. I just really invite you to think about the discomfort as an important indicator of you doing the internal work, doing some of the internal work that helps you to take also the steps externally for action towards racial equity.
Yeah, great. I want to be sure to have like 10, 15 minutes for folks to ask questions too. So I'm going to keep going. I love it. Some folks are saying, make sure you own your own inadequacies. True guilt should move us to address harm done. Shame is like a black hole for all good intentions or energy to move forward. Wow. That's a great point. So we must, in order to challenge, we must first acknowledge. And so that means that there is inevitably going to be gaps that you have in terms of what you know and what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know, right? But to acknowledge your gaps is the first part of it. If you're not comfortable enough to acknowledge something, you're certainly not going to be able to make any type of change. So we want to be to a place where we're able to have the uncomfortable conversations to begin to acknowledge what is really happening and how it is happening to people. There is harm in what we don't know. There's harm in what we don't think about, right? A lot of times people feel like privilege is this divisive term, but a lot of our privileges are things that we don't have to think about on a daily basis. And tapping into that will allow us to engage more critically in conversations about how our privileges might be exploiting other folk, right? What do I do or have access to that everyone should have access to? And if you come back with the question, well, I don't want everyone to have access to, well, then great, we got work to do. That's where we need to lean in to have that conversation, right? But a lot of times what we're talking about when we're talking about harm to people and privileges and demystifying privilege is identifying many gaps, the privilege to not know particular information or to not have that information be a priority for you. Then we have conflict, discomfort, change. I like to add deflection in there too. And so inevitably, when we're talking about change culture and change shifting, we want to know how to challenge ourselves to be brave in growing spaces by embracing discomfort. Folks ask me, Ashley, how am I going to embrace discomfort? I got ways. Right? It's doable. And a big part of it is about recognizing that there is a lot of information that we haven't had access to, and that's part of the oppressive system as well. Validation and perception. Some people will tell me, well, it's not my fault. Other folks perceive this way, or, communities are perceiving that we're not inclusive. Well, perception is rooted in reality. Known and unknown. The continued patterns of behavior, the data, the lived data that is collected over and over and over again that says that this is likely how I'm going to be treated in this space. Think about the recovery spaces that you're in. What is the realities of folks that might not be the intentions of the culture, but they are definitely the valid experiences of people or of other folks that people know about, right? We talk about vicarious trauma as well as a part of race-based traumatic stress, which we have a whole training on race-based traumatic stress. But, in race-based traumatic stress, we acknowledge that it can be vicarious, which means that my data about how I'm perceiving this space as being safe or not might be influenced by my own experience or by those of folks who look like me or share similar experiences to me. And it can be equally as harmful and equally as traumatically stressful in those situations as well. Yep. Great points, everyone. And then the reconciliation of multiple realities. Two things can be true and both. Critical self-awareness. Right. I have, worked really hard to create an inclusive space, and also these spaces have not been inclusive. Reconciliation of both. Because I think a lot of times what happens is if we have something that challenges a dominant narrative, or we have an experience that challenges what we're talking about when we're talking about racial equity, it can send people to shut down. Maybe, what you've experienced is true, and also is that the notion of the larger systemic issue. If not, then let's lean in and not deflect from the conversation. I'm not going to read through this whole slide, but I do want to talk briefly about, different ways that the culture within recovery spaces could potentially be influenced by racism. Right? Racism is enduring, it's a persistent source of stress for people of color in the United States. Right. And then, as someone mentioned earlier, they mentioned that there's also different levels of intersectionality of other oppressed identities that intersect with racism that compound. And this has become a normative experience. It is so normative that we don't even realize that we're being exclusionary, even when we're trying to be inclusive. That's what makes it normative. That's what makes it embedded. And sometimes it takes a different perspective or taking a step back to examine Oh, we actually don't even talk about this at all. We didn't think to. Yeah, it comes from a place of privilege. And so, there is, someone says that they love this slide. There's historical racist practices that overlap with recovery spaces, including healthcare systems, education systems, employment systems, media, criminal justice systems, right? And the list goes on and on. That is not even the beginning of a cohesive list of places that overlap with recovery spaces that racism is perpetuated in as well. Right? We could spend the entire hour just beginning a conversation about the overlap between criminal justice and recovery spaces. Employee assistance programs, referral programs, do people have options as to how and where to access recovery services? Are we having that conversation? How do people get to recovery services? And so a lot of times organizations will recruit people who have been educated within a particular type of system for how to engage with folks in recovery. And if we do not acknowledge that that system that's educating or informing people could also be potentially lined with institutionally biased at the minimum, but explicitly racist policies, then we don't even get to the point of acknowledging how that trickles into recovery spaces. This is the conversation we need to have. Acknowledging the historical racism of institutions and of institutions that train us about how to engage with recovery services. Talk about what healing looks like. Talk about what inclusion looks like. We must interrogate its positioning on the subject of racism. Livia, did you have something you wanted to add here?
I will wait till the other slide because I think you covered this one great. But this idea that the substance abuse treatment, as industry is embedded within, institutions that, how historical racism, I think, can't be overstated.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm.
So on this one, so many of you probably know William White. Bill White is a historian, researcher, and advocate, and he's also a person in long-term recovery from a substance use disorder. And he says, understanding oneself is incomplete when divorced from the history of one's people. And I love this quote a lot because it can really be looked at in the context of different things. He used this quote in 2020 in the context of making the point that people with lived experience of addiction and recovery, wherever they live in the world, they share a larger history, and that it's important to understand that history for a number of reasons. It's important in terms of how the systems and societies over time have traumatized people in recovery in many ways. People in recovery have been arrested, deported, tranquilized, theolized, institutionalized, exploited, demonized, colonized, restrained, denied probation, and be a subject of many other harmful acts. He also talks about the many strides in the recovery movement that people in recovery have made in recent decades, and that people in recovery are now also being celebrated, elevated, decriminalized, recognized, and mobilized, for example. Which means that when you look at the history of recovery, it's complex, and people in recovery can draw on their collective past to better understand their own story, their own purpose, and to help rise above the past. So the context that he used this quote in is really for people in recovery to understand their history and draw from that. If you look at this quote in context of promoting racial equity, it can also mean that, in my mind, that the recovery movement needs to look at how white dominant culture has shaped most recovery pathways, most recovery spaces, and what do we need to do to learn to create recovery spaces that work for Black, Indigenous, and people of color? What recovery pathways are actually excluding people of color? What is the culture in recovery spaces, as Ashley was talking about earlier? If you look at some of the recovery spaces or even the treatment system, right, are treatment systems often will say that, recovery happens in the community. And so therefore treatment systems haven't often looked at that. But that really negates the experience of most people who are going through recovery, because recovery does happen in the community. And so what can we do to really look at providing power, resources, and elevate community and all the traditions and rituals that come with that to support recovery? If you look at White Bison, they've done a lot of work to create recovery that builds on the culture and rituals in tribal communities, because they knew that the recovery spaces that were created by the white dominant culture did not build on what was important to many people in recovery in the tribal communities. So this is just an urging, an invitation for you to also think about history, and not only the history of your own people, or for people in recovery, but also the history of us collectively as Americans, and making sure that the history of all the people that occupy this country is really understood.
Amazing. Yes, thank you so much, Livia. It's a critical paradigm shift. We talk about this as so unfair. We should stand up with or for those folk. Versus, that's so unfair. How do I perpetuate, contribute to, or benefit from forms of oppression? And so as part of the trainings that we do, we like to talk about what are the barriers to authentic change. Because like I said, we want to have the conversations, but we want action to be behind it. And some of the barriers to authentic change could be organizational cultural imperialism. The reality that there are cultural norms that exist implicit in institutional biases that continue to hold grasp to inequitable and oppressive forces. We have structural biases, lack of intersectional empathy, which means a critical understanding. Empathy is a commonly misused term as well. But the lack of intersectional empathy, understanding that people are not of one particular experience, but that the reality of intersectional identities comes into place. Are people literally having to transition about how they posture their body to avoid violence in the workplace or violence in your organization? And maybe that violence looks like repeated microaggressions. Maybe that violence looks like continued oppression. Do people have to think about what they look like or how they sound in order to get the most basic levels of respect? We talk about what that looks like in terms of disaggregating data to ensure that there are built-in sustainable measures to ensure equity within culture shift.
And then quickly, on this slide, we talk about also the necessary ingredients for successful change. Any kind of transformation, any culture shift, right? Any strategic action really need to include all of these elements: vision, skills, incentives, resources, action, and an action plan. And this slide just talks about what happens if any one of those elements is missing. So you can see, you can have skills, incentives, resources, and action plan, but without a vision of where you're going is confusion. And so this is something we also cover, because people often ask us, where do we start? What does this look like? And so transformation, of course, and change process has a lot of evidence based behind it, and we'll cover some of that as well.
Other things that we cover as well are talking through these terms. And if any of these terms kind of set off your panic zone, I can't wait to talk to you about this some more, right? Because this is where we need to lean in so we have a functional working definition of these terms so we can begin to address it. And so it's not something that leads to dissociation, discomfort, or deflection. We want to be able to talk about it. So we talk about privilege, and we go into different types of privilege: identity-based privilege, positionality-based privilege, earned and unearned privilege, white privilege. We talk about it all. Biases, we look at implicit, explicit, institutional biases as well. Microaggressions, and not the 2017 version or definition, but we go back to the 1960s, 1970s to have a true appreciation for microaggressions and where the terminology comes from. We look at cultural imperialism and faces of oppression in the work of Iris Young. We look at race-based traumatic stress, insidious trauma, and historical trauma, as well as race-based traumatic stress Intersectionality, again, going back to that 1960s, 1970s framework and understanding intersectionality as well as critical race theory. I know critical race theory is a hot topic right now, and a lot of folks probably don't even really know the tenets of critical race theory or what it's from or where's the scholarship behind it. So we go into that and we talk about it because it doesn't need to be mystical. Like we can just talk about what the scholarship says. We talk about different forms of oppression. We specifically name and talk about anti-Black racism, white dominant culture, and specifically white supremacy. And so if these are things that you're hoping to begin to talk about or engage with in racial equity conversations, understanding and feeling comfortable with what these terms means is important. And beyond some of these terms, some of us are just wanting to build comfortability talking about race more broadly. What is the scientific history of racism? Do we know? Where did race even come from? We know that race is a social construct, but how is it constructed? Let's lean in, let's talk about it. So as we cannot challenge what we cannot acknowledge, and so to acknowledge about it, we have to be able to learn and talk about it. And so that's really what this initial 101 is for, is to help people be able to talk about these topics and develop a level of comfort and preparedness. So all the things that we talked about, strategies, planning, preparing, engaging, these are things that are covered in our addressing race-related barriers and recovery support services. It's a summer course that runs July 12th, 15th, 19th and the 22nd. It's 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern time, and it's for people who are looking to talk about any of the things that we talked about today and the list of terms that we just reviewed, as well as some of the strategies that we just reviewed briefly. Livia is going to talk a little bit more about who should take this course, but each of the sessions do have different focal areas that dive more deeply into the topics that we talked about today to ensure that folks have a level of comfort and preparedness to engage with these conversations. Livia, you want to talk a little bit about who should take the course?
So we hope that anyone who is working with or serving communities of color will be interested in learning more how better to provide services, work with folks to come up with defining the problems and designing solutions, will be interested in taking this course. So it's for staff and peer support providers at all levels. It's really important to start both at the ground level and at the top level of any program and any system, and to include people with lived experience to be part of transformation efforts. And so in order to really have transformation and make changes and not have it just be an additive or subcommittee that does this work, we really hope that people at all levels will consider taking this course.
Yes. Of course, there's opportunities for different CE credits as well. And you'll be hanging out with Livia and I as we and engage more with some of these critical topics. Based on the amount of engagement and feedback and participation for folk in this chat today, I know that this is a topic that's prevalent on many folks' minds. Many of us have been having more conversation about racial equity than we ever have before. And some of us will even say not even close to there being enough. So we want to make sure that we're doing this work, but we're also doing it thoughtfully and sustainably. And so that's what we're hoping to get us in a framework to be able to do with this course. Someone asked about different like scholarships that might be available, and what was shared is that you can email us to request a scholarship. Scholarship applications are due on the 28th, so very soon. So someone says, will they be able to take the course at another time? Yep, you can email us at training@c4innovates.com. Right. And yes, we hope to have at least 2 people from each agency or program, just so that there can be continuity and support for beginning to implement some of the things that we'll talk about and begin to apply within the sessions. This leads into, we have different levels of practice levels for these types of conversations, and this one will get the conversation off the ground and making sure that we feel comfortable and competent in having these conversations. Great. This has been wonderful. It's been so great to have all of you here today, to be able to have this conversation, to learn more about what y'all are interested about. And hopefully we'll have the opportunity to continue this conversation with some folk as well. We'll hang back if there's any quick questions, but otherwise I'll turn it back over to our C4 team to close us out.
So I'm just looking to see if there are any questions. I think we answered most of them as they were going on, as we were going through the time together. So as you can see, we will be offering intermediate and advanced level courses in the future. Again, so the dates for this course in the summer, as you can see, is July 12th, 15th, 19th, and 22nd. Ashley, Stewart, and I will be your faculty, and we hope that you will register. We look forward to working with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, folks.